So there's probably going to be some things in today's episode that you don't want to miss. Probably some really mind-blowing facts about dismissive avoidance that you may have not been aware of and that may actually change the way you see relationship dynamics with dismissive avoidance. And likewise, as I'll be somebody sharing from the experience of having been fearful avoidant, you may hear one specific thing towards the end that may completely change your viewpoint on attachment styles in general. So stay tuned, and I hope you enjoy this episode.
Her name is Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
Thais Gibson.
I hope I pronounce her name properly. Thais Gibson.
I am so excited for you to be here with me today. Thank you for joining us. Welcome back to another episode of Can This Be Fixed with myself, Thais Gibson, and our lovely, amazing co-host, Mike DeZio. If you've been watching the show for a little while, you know that we are co-hosts of this podcast and we share perspectives, having been fearful avoidant attachment style and moved to securely attached. And Mike DeZio was a dismissive avoidant attachment style who did the work to become securely attached as well. So we share perspectives. We share personal old stories so that you can really gain some deep insight into the mind of somebody going through these experiences at this time. So today we're going to cover a few really fun things. We are going to start by talking about how we processed breakups, having been fearful avoidant, and the types of coping mechanisms and ways we would process, and the types of habits or sort of strategies we would probably, without our own conscious awareness, use, or things we would do at the time of being insecurely attached. I'll share from the FA perspective, Mike from the dismissive avoidant perspective. And then we're going to share a question from our actual Reddit thread. Can this be fixed? And if you want to share your question on there, you can share away. And this question is about how a dismissive avoidant actually processes the breakup if the breakup was with somebody who's secure and what that's like for them traditionally. At the end of the episode, we're going to dive into what to do if a partner in a relationship, particularly an avoidant, is lying or being dishonest about what they're doing while dating. So excited to dive in here, Mike. And I'm curious if you want to kick it off just by sharing a little bit about when you were dismissive avoidant and you would go through a breakup. And let's talk about maybe two versions of it, like a breakup with a relationship that was kind of early days and you didn't really have much commitment and investment in, versus a breakup where like you really cared about somebody deeply. How would you process those different endings and what would you usually feel on the other side of that?
Feeling? What is that? Yeah, no, jokes aside. So if it was like kind of someone who I wasn't dating for too long and it was a breakup in like the early days, probably wouldn't have been a huge ordeal. I think I would have just gone on and gone on with my life status quo, probably not like, phone my friends and told everybody like this breakup happened. Probably just try to make it as normal as possible and go on with my life. If it was something a little bit longer, talking, 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, I know for sure I would probably be immersing myself a lot in like technology, internet, YouTube, social media, scrolling, all that kind of stuff. I think just a lot of time would be spent not feeling and more so just entertaining myself and just keep myself distracted and not really, out of sight, out of mind. That's kind of what comes into my head. It would be just very out of sight, out of mind, not thinking about the person and just continuously keeping myself busy by, again, scrolling, movies, videos, things of that nature. I think there would be yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, at the time when you would do that, would you notice that you were distracting yourself? Would you notice like, oh yeah, here I am. I'm kind of like avoiding myself before doing this, a lot of the work and things like that? Or was it totally out of your conscious awareness? Like just now looking back, you're able to reflect and realize that?
Yeah, I don't think it was in my awareness. I think at the time I didn't have any idea about sort of why I might be doing it. It was just totally unconscious. And yeah, great question. It's just something that I would have been, binging from morning till night and not really realizing, okay, I'm probably doing this to avoid having to think about the breakup, the loss, and thinking about how, just a lot of the things you do if you have a breakup and, might want to process the grief. So definitely it was a tool and a strategy just to stay from not feeling, just as we know a lot of avoidants do. The more you can do to not feel, sort of the safer it feels and the better. And then, like after a period of time, you eventually, stop and think like, wow, okay, it's been a while and I'm kind of like miss the person. And like, I sort of miss having someone to be beside and to do things with. And, I miss that person and how, sometimes things were good. And, I wasn't always feeling bad or upset during the relationship. So you start sort of reminisce, and then those feelings kind of come up of loss and maybe wondering what the person's doing and things like that. So
Now, at that time, when you would start to wonder like what the person's doing or those feelings come back up, can you just share for our listeners like what that traditional time frame would be for you? Like how long between the breakup and actually starting to think about what that person's doing and what's going on and, missing them a little bit and feeling some of those feelings?
yeah, it's going to be a bit of a guesstimate, but I'm going to think like a month and a half, maybe month and a half to like 2 months. I think the first month would have been fine and like no issues whatsoever. But then probably coming into month 2, I think that's when it would probably start the thinking about the person and having them come back into my mind. Yeah.
Yeah, makes perfect sense. It's so funny because like we talk about this on the channel a lot in PDF. Like usually dismissive avoidants are about 6 weeks to 3 months, like depending on how DA, where the first little while, and I'm curious if you can touch on this in your experience, the first little while you would see the dismissive avoidant be like, almost feeling free. Like, I'm free. I don't have to worry about the relationship. Okay. Like I have my space and my time back and all these things. And then it like creeps back in really slowly. And usually that won't start until around 6 weeks generally.
Yeah, totally. There's definitely that period of sort of feeling freedom and like, oh my gosh, like it's over, like I'm out. Because like breakups in general are like they're obviously not easy for anyone, but for like a DA, especially if they're the one wanting to initiate the breakup and leave the relationship, it's like super, super tough. And, DAs don't like the emotional big, things around emotions. And like if the partner is going to be really upset and like object to the breakup and there's this whole sort of emotional aspect to it, the DA's like, this is already like super, super hard to do in the first place. Once it's finally over and then the breakup's sort of complete, there is that feeling of like, oh my gosh, like I feel free now. Like I'm by myself, I'm back by myself. There's no one sort of, checking my behavior, and there's no one that I have to like care for and sort of meet their needs. I know that sounds terrible, but that's sort of the way that I used to think about it, was like, okay, it's back to just me versus the world. And that's sort of the best and safest way to do things.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was definitely a period of like, wow, like I feel so much of a weight off my shoulders. This is great. No one to answer to anymore. It's just, do what I want when I want and never have to tell anybody anything. Which really, when you think about it, and as I'm speaking now, it's kind of a sad way to live because, yeah, you don't have anyone to like answer to, but you also have no connection. Like you're alone and you're just with yourself, and you're kind of deeming that people are scary and not worthy of connection. And, if that's your belief, you're going to be kind of sad and lonely through your whole life. So,
yeah. A powerful point, because we're wired for attachment. We're also wired for like autonomy and independence, but like attachment too, and that connection to other people. So Val, can we go back for just a moment to the earlier relationships? So, let's say it's fresh, it's early. Would there be times where if you dated somebody and you were with them for 2 months, but you really hit it off, you like really clicked, that you would feel something a little bit that way? Or was it much more like, oh no, if it's just been a couple months, I sort of cope the same way. I don't feel too much. I move on quickly. What were your experiences there?
Actually, you know what? Now that you can put it that way, if it was someone that I felt like we really hit it off, because I always thought like, oh, it's really hard to like meet someone and have like a real deep, meaningful connection with. So it was someone that I hit it off with, and it only lasted a couple months, and then it ended. I probably feel like, oh, that kind of sucks. Like that was actually somebody who I felt like we had this pretty awesome connection with, and then it just like kind of fell apart for whatever reason. Um, I think I'd be thinking about that a little bit more and just wondering sort of what happened, and then maybe thinking like, oh, geez, like, am I ever gonna be able to like be in an amazing, great relationship? Like I thought this one had so much great potential. So yeah, I think there might be some period of thinking like, why did this happen, or why, what's going on here? But again, I don't think I'd spend too much time, and it'd probably just be going back to distracting activities if that happened to me. So I'm not sure if that answers your question exactly.
No, that's a really good. And I have one last clarifier here, because I know these are going to be the burning questions from the audience. When you were in situations where you did miss the person, how would you generally respond? So like what behaviors would follow? Would you just keep deactivating? What did you feel about reaching back out? Did you think about it? What was your experience?
Yeah, for me, I feel like reaching back out was like such like last case scenario. Like I don't know if it was like pride or ego or just straight up fear, but like even if I missed the person, I felt like reaching out was not going to be an option. And I think just thinking about the things that went wrong and the problems in the relationship kept me from reaching out to the person and wanting to reinitiate. So basically, yeah, instead of thinking about all the great things that were happening, I'd sort of remind myself of, Mike, she didn't fully accept you for who you were. Mike, she always, would get upset at you for this. Like, I had all these thoughts of like, I don't think things would ever change or we're going to get better. So it would be really pointless to go backwards and try to get back with them. So for me and myself, I can only speak for myself, but I'm the type where I probably wouldn't have ever wanted to reach out. Or sorry, I might have wanted to reach out, but I probably would not have reached out. No.
And what about if there was like an amicable breakup? So like, I know you and I have been dear friends for like 10 plus years and known each other for a long time. And like, I can think of people that I know that you've dated who are like lovely, and you broke up for like good reasons, like moving or distance or things like that.
Yeah.
In those cases, would you have moments of like, oh, I should reach back out because there's distance, it justifies it? Like I'm curious, because it's really going to bleed into the question that we have coming up, which is, if a dismissive avoidance is broken up with by somebody who's secure, which is sort of like going along the same trajectory, how they're going to process it potentially a little bit differently.
Mm-hmm. So in that scenario, you're asking like, would I reach out in that scenario when it's like amicable breakup?
Yeah.
Amicable. I guess that would be a lot easier to do so because there's no real, fear of like being rejected if I reached out again. Like it would probably be a welcome message if you reach out to the person and just said, hey, how's it going? But again, I don't know if there's a DA thing, and maybe you can help me with this. For me, a lot of times, like amicable or not, like when it's done, it's pretty much for me, like it's done.
Yeah.
I've only had one relationship that I can classify as kind of like toxic, like not the best relationship, where we broke up and got back together like dozens of times. And there was a lot of just fighting and just really it wasn't a healthy relationship. And maybe that relationship scared me so bad that I just thought, like once a couple breaks up, if they can't work through the problems that they have going on, that if there is an actual breakup, then that's kind of it. Like there's no real turning back from that. So
really healthy. Like I actually think it's really important that if you can't work through the problems and there was pretty big problems, that you don't get back together. So I fully support that. Like otherwise we're just going to go back through the same like vicious cycle over and over again.
Yeah.
So I think that that's great. But yeah, to your point, a lot of dismissive avoidants are like, no, once it's over, I'm shut down completely. But you will see like a good chunk of dismissive avoidants who do reach back out later after a breakup.
Mhm.
But I always, like, back when I was running my client practice, I would tell people like, hey, just because somebody reaches back out doesn't necessarily mean they're trying to get back together. Like a lot of people will reach back out and they're reaching back out for like sometimes like validation or connection or reassurance or a little bit of like attention or to see if you're still there. But that doesn't make them like ready for a relationship. So there's so much that has to take place after that to see like, is this person willing to do the work? Are you both willing to talk through patterns and see what wasn't working and try to put things back together? So I think that it brings up like a really important question. And I think we've talked about some of those things on previous episodes here about what to do after a breakup. But yeah, I think those are fantastic shares.
Would you say for our audience too, if somebody is reaching back out, are you well within your means to be like, hey, like, nice to hear from you, but like, really, like, what's the reason you're reaching out to me here for? Like, is it just, are you lonely? Are you bored? Are you wanting to reconnect? Are you wanting to be friends? Like, what do you think is the best way someone can straight up say, like, hey, what's going on here? Why are you reaching out? Because there's nothing worse of like entertaining someone and then having to try to like pick up clues and figure out like what's going on here. So I was just wondering if you have any tips on if somebody does reach out, is it okay to like be really blunt and be like, hey, why are you reaching out to me after 3 months here? What's going on?
Yeah, it's such a good question. I feel like I have like a kind of complicated answer. I feel like if it's fresh after a breakup, like it's like 2-3 weeks later, the person's reaching out, and if that breakup was pretty lengthy, like or the relationship was pretty lengthy, so like they dated for however long, like 3 years, 4 years, and it's just a few weeks later, yeah, you should have that conversation almost immediately. If it was like, you dated for 3 or 4 years and then the person reaches back out and it's 6 or 8 weeks later, usually what you'll see is if you abruptly ask a dismissive avoidant, like, hey, why are you reaching out? Are you trying to get back together? They'll panic because they're like, wait, too much too soon. They usually have this sort of period of chatting, reconnecting, talking back and forth for 3-4 weeks over message, spending a couple times in person. And generally after you spend a couple times in person, you're like, hey, we're hanging out again. I don't want to waste my own time. I want to make sure that like if we are hanging out and if there is something still romantic here, that like either we're going to do the work now to see if it can become something, or and that's where we'll have those conversations about what didn't work, what we can do differently, or I can't like continue hanging out if there's still feelings involved. So that's usually like that sort of getting back together with the exing if somebody's really still in love, or they, a big thing that we'll see all the time in PDS is people come in and it's like they didn't know anything about attachment styles or attachment theory. So they didn't understand their partner. They dated for, let's say, 4 years, broke up. Now it's been 6 weeks. They're like, I still love this person. Oh my gosh, I learned all these things. We could do things differently. So that's like sort of that framework to do things there. And then the last one is if somebody, has been broken up with for a long time and the person is, reconnecting after a year or two, you have a different sort of conversation. Like, what are your standards and non-negotiables? Like with yourself, you're having the conversation. And then if the person is showing up and trying to make an effort, or if they show up and say like, hey, I've been doing the work, here's the things I've been doing, then we may reconsider it. But there has to be like a full vetting process, just like starting from dating again. Like, what are my needs? Is the person meeting them? And like really taking the time to do that. And I always recommend with people, they set a deadline so that you don't just leave this like open-ended process where we have feelings, but we're just going to wait it out forever and see if like something comes to fruition, because that can just end up as a really painful situation long term.
Right. I know a lot of people asked about the deadline thing. The deadline, just to clarify, is that for your own? You don't share that with the other person? Or is that something you're letting the other person know, like, hey, I'm willing to entertain talking again, see how things go. But if things don't really change within the next however many months or weeks, is that something you share with the other person, or is that just for yourself?
It's just for yourself. So there can be times like if couples are working together and couples counseling or doing the work together, they can set like an internal deadline in the relationship where they're like, hey, we're at our last straw, but let's give it one last go. Let's pour everything we can in here for 6 months, see if we can move the needle. You can have that conversation, but the vast majority of the time, the deadline is like an internal thing. So if it's somebody that you're not married to, you don't have kids with, or things like that, it's more like, hey, is this person healthy? And if they are healthy, or they're willing to show up, I set the deadline for what I would need to see change within that period of time. And if I don't see the needle move, then I know that this relationship isn't going to work and I have to walk away. So it's very like internal in the relationship to self.
Nice. Makes sense.
Yeah. Thank you. Okay. So I'll share for a second just about the fearful avoidant experience, and then we'll go into the user question. So for me, in when I was fearful avoidant, this really actually brings something up that's so interesting. And I'm actually really curious for anybody who's listening, if you ever felt like this, because I haven't really thought about this very much before. When I would be dating somebody in the early stages, if we were dating and then things didn't work out before it actually turned into something, sometimes that would actually like quite affect me. Like sometimes, especially if I was like, wanting to build momentum and see where it could go, and then it kind of fizzled out. I had a lot of like pride issues when I was fearful avoidant, not even pride. So it wasn't like pride, it was like fear. And so I wouldn't like reach out first or do much. And so if somebody wasn't making enough of an effort, I'd sort of pull away because I would just fear like, oh, they're for sure going to hurt me then. And so I wouldn't like, I'd always like kind of leave it in the other person's court to like do a lot of the work, honestly, and like the courting phase. Like looking back now, I'm like, I probably didn't show much interest to people in an obvious way because I was like terrified. And so I didn't know I was terrified at the time, but I would like reject people because I would in my head be like, oh, they're going to hurt me. So like I have to stay away, or I have to like pull back. And so anyways, in hindsight though, sometimes then if things, 3 or 4 months in didn't work out, sometimes that would almost like affect me more instantly. Like I think that I would feel, I guess, the anxious side of the fearful avoidant attachment style more, where I would feel like kind of like, oh, like that's that, or I would like feel it more like the sting of the breakup or the falling apart of something. But in longer term relationships, like anytime I'm in a longer term breakup, I feel like I probably mirrored a lot more of like the dismissive avoidant attachment style. Like I would just shut down, numb out, avoid, escape myself a lot of the time and avoid my feelings, and then proceed to eventually like have, the wondering creep back in, a few weeks later, 3-4 weeks later, 5 weeks later, and be like, oh, I wonder what they're up to or what's going on. And then it wouldn't last very long. I would go back to like sort of pushing and rejecting in my mind that relationship dynamic. So it's interesting. Like there was definitely a little bit of push-pull there within me, but I definitely was, I never really grieved or like processed things at the time. I would just step down, feel a little bit pop up, stuff back down, proceed to move on, was sort of my experience at the time. And one thing I did eventually do is really take time to learn to be with myself. And I think that was really healing. But
Nice.
I probably mirrored more of like dismissive avoidant dynamics in terms of how I process breakups.
Yeah. When you're talking about your distraction activities, dismissive avoidance are more like video games, movies, like kind of like get lost in like alternate worlds to distract themselves. What's the FA sort of distractions? Is it being with friends all the time? Is it going out and partying? Like, was there anything specific that you would do to sort of keep your mind off of the breakup?
I'm probably like a special case because I like wasn't just a fearful avoidant. I definitely had like some sobriety issues that I share about on this channel all the time as a teenager. And so for me, it was like drinking and drugs and partying for sure. Like that would be like, I can think of like one breakup I went through when I was like just turned 20 or so. And I just went out like every day of the week for like a month. Like I think I just never stayed in, like and I was just in this state of, not being sober at all, and just really, really in that. And so, so definitely that. But, it's funny because then I got sober soon after that relationship ended, like over the process over the next like 6 to 8 months, which ended like a long history of for me, 6 years of like really struggling. But what's interesting is, at that point in time, I ended up being single for a really long time. I ended up like, wait, hold on, Kaide, I'm going to re-say that. I fully lost my train of thought. I was like really slow to communicate. So that was a sort of 6-year period for me at the time of struggling with like sobriety, got that together, and then was really single for a long time. And then was in the next serious relationship I had was now with my now husband. So I didn't have like a typical FA just like response, but what I see with FAs is a lot of similarities, just in more of a muted form. So like maybe people are numbing by going out more and just drinking more often. Maybe people are going out more and they're in a place where they are or people are like binge eating food more often, or people are like, there would be these like sort of coping mechanisms. And for a lot of people, it would be like smoking more cigarettes or smoking more weed or drinking more alcohol, or, these sort of like numbing out activities. And I do find that tends to be particularly prevalent for fearful avoidant attachment styles. Almost like the numbing is like more unhealthy than you would maybe even see with just a traditional dismissive avoidant, and them numbing as well.
Right. Okay. That makes sense. And what attachment style tends to want to use other people as numbing out activities? So like maybe having casual encounters with people, meeting people at bars, like using sort of other people to take away the sting of the breakup.
I would definitely say anxious attachment styles in a healthier form. Like, again, they still like part of them becoming more healthy and more centered is them being able to work on themselves and like build a relationship to self and learn to self-soothe and regulate their own nervous system. Like those are just such important things for anxious attachment styles. But they often very much use people originally to numb, right? But a lot of it's healthier people. So it won't just be like an immediate rebound relationship per se, where they people please their way into the relationship or something. It's usually things like spending a lot more time with friends or going back home to visit family, or things that like, are generally quite healthy. But we can see for sure anxious attachment styles be more likely to also go out more, try to meet new people right away, things like that, and fearful avoidance both. And I've seen dismissive avoidance do it too. Not a lot of dismissive avoidance really just retreat more than anybody else, but yeah, I would definitely say the vast majority are anxious and fearful avoidance that would do that.
I think dismissives might have their own version of it where they get back on the apps probably quicker than they should. Before they've even taken a minute to process the breakup. So they might go on the apps, not leave the house, not want to go out and, socialize and meet people organically. It might be, trying to meet someone on an app and then maybe try to get someone to maybe come over or vice versa, and sort of bypass all of that sort of social time and energy needed to meet a new person. Now that I think about it, like for sure, I've done this before where I've gone back to the apps, the online dating apps, way quicker than I should have before I processed the breakup, before I took any time to really think about the breakup and what happened and my part in it. And I just went on the apps and was just trying to like meet someone and maybe have like a small meetup or like a casual encounter, and not really have to put in any sort of work or energy into like dating again. But I thought it would be cool to like have someone there to, to feel good with. So I do think that it might be a dismissive avoidance thing. And I've heard of this too, where they do tend to go to the apps because a lot of times there's not a lot of emotional heavy lifting required. And if you are looking just for something kind of casual without having to put in all the dates of the time and all that kind of stuff, the apps can kind of be like a good place for that. So
absolutely. I was waiting for you to finish. I was going to say the exact same thing. It's like the interesting part, because it's like you get some sort of connection, but in small forms, though, too much demand, too much intimacy, and too much emotional vulnerability required in that kind of way too. So it's like you'll see that a lot with dismissive avoidance as well. And honestly, I find that it's important if somebody is going on dating apps and they're like, okay, I'm trying to meet like a partner here and like have a healthy relationship. I actually think it's such an important question to just ask early on, into maybe the first time you meet with somebody, like, oh, what was your most recent relationship? Or what was the most recent time you dated somebody? Because a lot of times if somebody's like, oh, it was a month ago or 2 weeks ago, or I'm just fresh from a breakup, like a lot of times that person may not be fully ready to invest. And I think that's an important like vetting conversation to have.
100%. And you know what? Like there's people for everyone out there. There's somebody else out there who might have got out of a relationship super quick and just needs someone to hang out with and whatever. And that's fine, but it's really up to you to know that what you want and then find out what the other person's looking for. And if that's not in alignment, you need to like cut it off right away, because there's just so much time wasted, so many tears wasted, so much energy wasted on people who are literally telling you like they're not going to give you what you want. But sometimes we could just be so starved for affection that we just ignore it. And obviously our core wounds are going to lead us to situations that are not good for us either. But yeah, the point being is just, especially on the apps, be careful out there. Because people will just, say anything to try to get you to, do things that you might want to do, not want to do. But it's up to you to vet them, know what you want, and just do not waver on those non-negotiables. Your non-negotiables are your non-negotiables. Do not like bend them for anybody, because it's just going to lead you to like heartbreak for sure.
Yeah, 100%. So let's dive into, we'll take a quick break, and when we come back, we will dive into the user question, which sort of leapfrogs off of the conversation Mike and I have been having here, which is, how does a dismissal avoidant process a breakup if they were broken up with by a secure attachment style? What are some of those differences? And if you are not already following us on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, anywhere where you listen to podcasts, or if you listen on audio and want to check us out on YouTube for the full video version, please do so. And you can always also post your own questions on our Can This Be Fixed Reddit thread online as well. Be right back. I just wanted to pop in here and let you know we are doing a 7-day free trial to the All Access Membership Pass at PDS, which means you get access to literally everything inside of the school. And this includes the 4 live webinars I do with our students every single week. And on top of that, you get access to all of our different courses. We have over 55 different courses on relationships, communication, boundaries, emotional mastery, guilt and shame, learning your needs, so many different facets that are really important to master our lives and feel really good about our lives going forward. And last but not least, there's a daily community event. We have trained facilitators and coaches who are in there doing that work, showing up to support you on your journey every single day. Please join me on the other side. Come check it out. See if it's a fit for you. I'd love to see you there. Go ahead and sign up by clicking the link in the description box below. Welcome back. Our Reddit user today says, how do DAs process being dumped by a secure partner? I typically see content that assumes the DA made the decision to break up, or the anxious avoidant drama cycle is present in the relationship, or there's no closure. But how do DAs process the end of a relationship when A, the DA was broken up with while they were still invested and did not want the connection to end? It was a longer term relationship of over 2+ years. Mine was actually 6 years for that matter. And there weren't any significant push-pull dynamics or breakdowns. There was a baseline of mutually reciprocated trust, safety, support, and love, even if some insecurities were present. For example, arguments are solved pragmatically with joined action. Secure partner knows how to open up with emotional control, and the dismissive avoidant opened up on their own volition and allowed for follow-up questions for more depth of understanding, but their limits were respected. So I think this is a fantastic question. And if you want to kick it off, Mike, what do you have to say?
Yeah, I do feel like for a DA, if they were being broken up with by a secure partner, and if they didn't want this to happen, that it obviously would be pretty like devastating and upsetting. For the reason that DAs already, as we've talked about in the past, they're always sort of thinking that there's someone out there better for them, better suited for them. There's somebody who's perfect for them. And I have this feeling that if it's a secure person who's dating the DA kind of knows, wow, like this person's pretty awesome. And this is probably my best chance of being with someone who's this, like, not perfect, but this amazing. I think the DA realizes like, wow, this person's pretty special. Like they're super patient. They are good at bypassing my core wounds. They're good at communication. Like the DA for sure is going to notice that this person is like pretty evolved in relationships. And they're also going to notice that, hey, like this is probably the most comfortable I've felt in a relationship before, because this person seems to have a lot of awareness, have a lot of emotional awareness, and are able to sort of lead the relationship. However, if they do get broken up with, at some point they just have to accept it and be like, okay, like I either am not doing the work to sort of bring myself up to this person's level. And, I can only keep this up for so long. So while, yes, it would be super devastating and upsetting, I would imagine a DA, and I know for myself, I would be like, well, at some point, this was sort of going to happen. Like, if I'm not willing to do the work on myself and heal my core wounds, like, eventually I'm going to feel like, I'm not good enough, I'm defective. Like, all my core wounds aren't just going to go away, even though the person is good at maybe like kind of avoiding and like knowing sort of what areas to stay away from. At some point, those things are going to come up. And if you're always going to be feeling that way, it doesn't matter how secure the person is, like that is going to eventually rise to the surface and just cause problems. And really, you're going to sabotage it yourself anyway. So just to wrap up, I just think, yes, it would be very, very upsetting because you're thinking, wow, this was my shot at actually somebody who is amazing that I think I'd want to be with for a long, long time. But I think I would also think, okay, I see why they would leave. I could see why, I'm not stepping up in the ways that they want me to step up. I'm not doing the things that I should. And if I do want this in the future, I know I need to do work on myself. Otherwise, we're going to kind of have the same problems over and over and over. So.
Yeah. And I think just to add to that too, because that was a great share, I think to add to that too is like a lot of dismissive avoidance, they have this after like a couple of years, like a couple of years plus, when they start to really get this sense of like connecting to this person, relying on this person. I often find that dismissive avoidants have this thing where they have almost this breakup boomerang effect where they will not feel too much for a while, kind of like we've been talking about in the earlier part of this episode, be able to really repress their feelings, seem like everything's great, everything's fine. And then over time, they start to really like grieve a little bit more. And I think they miss a lot of the comfort and the safety of a relationship dynamic. I think they miss having this like the almost security of having somebody there and just like those added benefits that come with connection in various ways. And so generally what you'll see is they miss some of that. And then they don't know how to be vulnerable enough to open up for that. And they also, after a couple of years, generally we see like dismissive avoidants start to share and show themselves a little bit more, right? It takes a long time for them to actually start to like let their walls down and really share like their inner world with somebody. And if there was a dismissive avoidant who did show and share their inner world and then the relationship didn't work and they got broken up with, and in this person's case, it was 6 years that they were in the relationship together, almost guarantee that the dismissive avoidant is having this like sort of breakup boomerang effect where at first they sort of repress their feelings. They think they're fine. But then as time goes on, especially a few weeks later, they'll start to grieve the person and really feel it. And I've often found that in situations like that, especially again, where it's like 6+ years, secure kind of dynamic, that the dismissive avoidant seems to have the longest time truly getting over the breakup. Like they'll have periods and bouts of grieving. And I really believe a part of the reason for this is that fearful avoidance and dismissive avoidance fearful avoidance and anxious attachment styles both, they have an easier time building new connections and fostering more vulnerability. Whereas dismissive avoidance, they're not really quick to like be open and vulnerable. And so those needs of like deeper connection aren't really going to be met for a dismissive avoidant in the way that they will eventually be met in other forms, even through friends or family members with fearful avoidance or anxious attachment styles. And so that need to be like seen or known or validated more or really connected to or understood, if some of those things were even being met by a partner. And then it's 6 years in this person's case, and then that person breaks up and goes away, I really think that the dismissive avoidant will probably be struggling a little bit and having a tricky time processing the breakup. And really like their work will be to go and find other healthy sources of connection over time, practice being more vulnerable, open up to other people like friends and family members. And that may be a sort of hard feat for them to take part in, but it's also something that's really important and necessary for the healing journey after a 6-year relationship.
That's such a great point. And it's kind of bringing me back to old relationships too. Like it takes a long time for me to sort of open up and show like a side of myself that I don't show to like everyone. So it's pretty special when you're with someone and you develop that kind of dynamic. It's like, wow, like this is pretty special. Like I've been spending most of my life trying to like sort of hide parts of myself and like not show parts of myself that I'm shameful of or don't like. But then when you have cultivated a relationship where you can bring out literally all sides of yourself and not feel shame and not feel weird and strange and dysfunctional, that feels amazing. So you're right. When that's totally gone, you just kind of like, it's pretty upsetting. Like you're pretty like, oh my God, like now I have to like go back out there and like date again and like put on this sort of mask again and pretend I'm, trying to present somebody who I'm not. So you just totally reminded me, like when you have that and then once it's sort of taken away, that can be pretty devastating. That can be really like almost like a loss of like, a part of you. You're like, oh my gosh, like that felt so good and easy when I was around that person. And then when they're gone, you're like, oh my gosh, like I don't have that anymore. This might take a long time for me to get that back with someone else. So that's such a good point that you brought up there. And I'm glad you brought that up.
So the last thing I'll just add to this question is that if you're somebody who's going through a 6-year breakup and you're the one who did the breaking up with and you're securely attached, chances are it was probably for a good reason. Generally, we won't see secure attachment styles make very rash decisions or emotionally based decisions that are super sudden to break up. So if you did the work, you did the vetting, you really tried to make things work and get your needs met, and you weren't seeing that it was a good fit, what I would say is just a process to help you dive deeper into processing grief, is to go through, the grieving of the breakup by understanding like what your ex was needing in terms of needs. And when you can really isolate what needs were being met by him and take that opportunity to get those needs met in new updated forms and healthier ways, it actually moves the needle into a space where you will find yourself moving through the grieving process much more quickly. Because generally when we're grieving a breakup, we're grieving the void that's left behind of needs that we were having met through a partner and needs that we were attached to. So maybe your partner or your ex made you feel, validated or seen or important or connected, or maybe they had a sense of humor and they would make you laugh. You have to go find other new forms of those needs being met, and it will actually speed up the grieving process post-breakup. So I definitely want to encourage you to look into that. We have a course in PDF all about this that lists out all the needs called How to Heal from a Breakup Fast. And I will put the link in the show notes as well, or in the YouTube description to that course specifically. Yeah. So we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back in the third segment of this episode, we are going to talk a little bit about what to do if you are dating somebody you find that they are being dishonest about some of the things that they're doing in a relationship dynamic. What does that mean? Why might that be happening? And what should you do in this particular case? We'll be right back. So the summer is coming to a close, and now it's time to welcome in probably our much busier season. And if you're anything like me, the last place you probably want to be spending time is figuring out what to eat for dinner and standing in long grocery store lines. So you can make life easier with HelloFresh, which is America's #1 meal kit. With fresh ingredients and simple recipe cards delivered straight to your door, HelloFresh takes care of all of your meal planning, shopping, and meal prep. And I really can't express how much time HelloFresh has actually saved me each and every week. What I love most is the variety. So whether you're looking for fit and wholesome or quick and easy, vegetarian, or even family-friendly options, their ever-changing recipes keep food exciting when it comes to dinner and never leave me feeling like I'm making the same meals and just eating the same food over and over again. So if you're ready to save time and make cooking much more enjoyable for you and your loved ones, you can go for free breakfast for life at HelloFresh.com/free Thais. That's THAIS. And you'll get one free breakfast item per box while your subscription is active. That's free breakfast for life just by going to HelloFresh.com/free Thais, THAIS. And now for a word from our sponsors. If you need to hire, you need Indeed. Indeed is your matching and hiring platform with over 350 million global monthly visitors, according to Indeed data, and a matching engine that actually helps you find quality candidates fast. So you can ditch the busy work. And you can use Indeed for scheduling, screening, and messaging, which allows you to then connect with candidates much faster. And Indeed doesn't just help you hire faster. 93% of employers agree that Indeed delivers the highest quality matches compared to other job sites, according to a recent Indeed survey. And one of the things I love about Indeed is that it makes all hiring in one place easy because you literally have the perfect match of candidates there. In fact, Indeed is something that we use all the time for hiring candidates at the personal development school, and I would feel a little bit lost without it, to be perfectly honest. When I was looking to hire somebody, it was originally slow and overwhelming until I decided to just go straight to Indeed, and that's when everything became a lot more simple. And it's still something that we use and will continue to use all the time. Leveraging over 140 million qualifications and preferences every day, Indeed's matching engine is constantly learning from your preferences as well, so the more you use Indeed, the better it actually gets. So you can join 3.5 million businesses worldwide that use Indeed to hire great talent fast. And listeners of the show will actually get a $75 sponsored job credit to get your jobs more visibility at Indeed.com/Thais. Just go to Indeed.com/Thais right now, and you can support our show by saying you heard about Indeed on this particular podcast. Again, that's Indeed.com/Thais. Terms and conditions may apply. Need to hire? You need Indeed. Welcome back to Can This Be Fixed? We have another wonderful Reddit user question, and they say, my boyfriend, who's a DA, sometimes lies to me, FA, about what he's doing. I know his ex was very controlling, but I have no desire to control his free time, and I am hurt he would say he's working if he wants to spend time with friends. I am fine if he wants to spend time with friends. Tonight, it was an outright lie that was fact-checkable. How do I bring this up? Do I even confront him? What a great question. So Mike, I would love for you to kick off the answer here, and also if you want to share a little bit about if you ever did that in a relationship dynamic and why. I think that would be so helpful because, as anybody listening knows, Mike was once a dismissive avoidant himself.
Yeah, for sure. This was an interesting one. I've definitely had this in many, many relationships in the past where I always felt like going out with your friends or like taking time for yourself or whatever was like not cool, like not good. Like you weren't supposed to do that. So I'd almost feel like I would have to like hide it, and like doing that would upset my partner. So I would have to like I said, just not say anything and then go off and do it. The problem is, like the question here, then once your partner finds out, you're literally like caught in a lie, which is so dumb. Like you're lying about, oh, I went to a show with my friend John. When really, if you were to just say that in the beginning, like your partner wouldn't think anything. So for myself, I think it came back to, I remember when I was young, my dad used to like to go to the racetrack, and, you know, he wouldn't go out and gamble the whole family's money away, but he liked to just go. Like part of it was social and part of it was just fun, right? But I remember my mom would get so upset if she found out that he was going to the racetrack. So then I noticed that he wouldn't tell her. He would just come home sometimes, and sometimes he would slip me and my brother like $20 and be like, don't tell your mom. So we knew that he had a good day at the racetrack if he gave us a few dollars. But I think at a young age, like the vibe to me was, don't tell your partner what you're doing because they're not going to approve, and they're going to take away something that's fun for you and that you enjoy. And you know, you just have to stop doing it altogether if you don't, if you tell them. So I know for later in relationships, I just thought like, I don't know why, I just thought it was like inappropriate, or like my partner would get upset if I were to like go hang out with the boys or like go out on a Saturday night to a bar with my friends. So there was like long periods of time where I just felt like, you know, my partner's gonna get mad. But then fast forward to present day, like, again, every partner would rather know what's going on than not know, because if they don't know what's going on and then you get found out, it's just so like you created much bigger of a problem than already was there, you know? So basically, like most normal people, like it's okay for you to have your interests and passions and things outside of the relationships. Like you had those things before you started the relationships, and you should continue having them during the relationship. But if you're not open about them and you actually don't bring them up sort of earlier on in the relationship, it's going to be sort of harder like later in the relationship. For example, like let's say, I don't know, you like to go play video games with your friends, which is totally fine thing. But if like 3 years into the relationship, you've never told your partner about this, and then all of a sudden you're like, oh, okay, I'm going to go play video games with my friends on Saturday night, and I'll be home at like 2 a.m. The partner's probably like, what? Like, what is this? Like, Saturday night, usually we, I don't know, go for dinner. We have our usual Saturday night hangout. But the point there is like, if you like playing video games with your friends and you were doing that for a long time before, don't stop doing that completely. If somebody new comes into your life, of course, there's going to be some adjustments and like less time over here, more time over there, et cetera, et cetera. But like the worst thing you can do is just to completely stop doing the things that you used to enjoy. And you can comment on this as well, but like dismissive avoidance, we know they get embarrassed. They think their partner might think they're like weird or like a loser or strange if they're doing stuff that's like labeled as like not cool. So they might feel embarrassed that they go to their friend's house and play video games. They might feel embarrassed that they, go do activities that are different than what their partner likes. But again, like you have to let your partner know that you like these things. That's part of who you are. And if you want to be loved and accepted, all of you, then you have to share sort of all of yourself.
So I couldn't agree more. I think you literally raised like 3 or 4 really important points there. And I think the first one is, yes, like a lot of dismissive avoidance seem to have, and I think like what's shared is even if a dismissive avoidant didn't necessarily have like the same dynamic with dad going to the racetrack, a lot of dismissive avoidance, if they feel like there's going to be some kind of conflict, will just like not share things to just avoid the potential conflict if they think there even is a chance that there would be one. And the other thing is I think sometimes, and I'm curious if you ever experience this personally, but I would see this a lot with dismissive avoidant clients. Sometimes they would also be like, I shouldn't have to spend all this time with my partner. Like once or twice a week is more than enough. So they're asking for time on other days. I don't have to A, say yes, or B, I shouldn't have to disclose what I'm doing. Like I don't even have to tell. And there'd almost sometimes be this like rebellious dynamic I would see with dismissive avoidant clients where they'd be like, well, if I want to go hang out with friends, I don't have to tell them. So I'm just going to say, hey, I had a fun night. How was yours? And if they're like, what did you do? Just chilled. Like just say something really high level. And it may not be lying and it may not be intentionally to like deceive at all, or even just to deceive to avoid conflict. But it may sometimes be this rebelliousness where they're trying to still carve out their own need for space. And they're like, okay, if I can keep this boundary here and not share what I'm doing, then, I'm keeping my independence. And I would see that happen quite frequently in the early like power struggle stage of relationships with dismissive avoidance. So before I say a couple other things, did you ever have that experience where you would, you felt like, okay, it was just to avoid conflict, or, some of those alternate reasons?
I would say definitely like, I just wouldn't share that much about like what happened between me and my friends. Like it just, to me, like it didn't seem that interesting to like share every little detail. I don't know if that's a guy thing. I don't know if that's a DA thing or whatever, but like, it's kind of like the parents at the kitchen table who ask their kids like, oh, how was school today? You're like, fine. Oh, what did you guys study? Nothing. Like, I don't know. I just never felt like that wordy about like, oh, well, my friend Josh, he's been doing this, that, or the other. Oh, hey, we did this. Like, I just never really got into like super duper detail about what we did when we hung out. So I don't think it was like protest, or I don't think it was like, oh, that's none of your business type thing. It was just more so that like, if you want to ask me pointed questions, I'll answer them, no problem. But if you just ask me like, oh, how was the hangout? I probably won't just go into like 20 minutes of like describing every single thing about the hangout. So I don't know. That's all I can say about that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think like on the topic of it, more like if somebody's not saying what they did at all or where they went, like that would be one thing, like they're actively kind of like hiding. But yeah, I totally hear that. That's a very DA thing, I think, for sure.
Yeah.
And even like fearful avoidance can be a little bit like that sometimes. But to your point, I know we talked about this in the first episode and you said this and it was like one of the best things ever. It's like one of the hacks is like ask a dismissive avoidant if you want to like stir up conversation, ask them a pointed question. Don't say, how was your evening? Say like, what happened with this or that? Like get very specific. And that's how like the conversation's more likely to flow. So to your point of the other part of this question where like, does a dismissive avoidant feel embarrassed? And so that's why they don't disclose things like video games. Yes, absolutely, because there can be shame wounds and often dismissive avoidants shame themselves for like very normal things like playing video games or watching television. Like, oh, like so shameful, but like it's not shameful. It's just that they have those pre-existing shame wounds that are there. And I do really think to your point, which is such a powerful point to raise, that in this particular situation, if you're seeing that you are an avoidant, whether fearful avoidant, dismissive avoidant, even if you're an anxious attachment style, this still applies. Like, don't change yourself when you start dating into some like ideal that you think the person has from you. Like, be yourself fully and authentically. Share all the things, do all the things that you would want to be doing in a long-term relationship so that you're not having these behaviors show up in the power struggle stage when it's actually likely to unravel the relationship dynamic. Show up with those things early. Make that be a part of your vetting process to see how somebody responds to those things. And if somebody else is showing up in a healthy way, if they need you to make a compromise, like if you hang out with your guy friends 6 nights a week to play video games and they're like, hey, I actually need more quality time in the relationship. We need to see each other like 2 or 3 times a week. Have those conversations, right? And then all of a sudden that person will make the compromises or not, but you'll get that information in a healthy way and be able to keep moving things across or ahead on like a proper foundation of building a relationship because there's authenticity, there's truth, there's alignment, and you're actually doing the vetting work. So I love that you said that, and I couldn't agree more. And I think it really goes back to those 2 parts, which are number one, dismissal avoidants don't really need to be shaming themselves too much in a relationship dynamic. And it's worthwhile to work through your shame wounds so you don't feel, because shame is a wound that makes us want to hide, right? So you don't want to have the shame that then causes you to hide. And then those behaviors show up in like hidden forms or in dishonest ways. And then second to that, absolutely, we should like put our best foot forward by being our authentic selves during dating. So to go back to this question for a moment, Mike, what advice would you give this person? Like, what would you say, hey, this is something really good to be doing?
Yeah, there's obviously a reason why the person's doing these white lies, and probably they have a belief that you're going to get mad. So I would just, straight up ask them like, hey, listen, like, I've noticed that you sometimes have told little white lies about where you are if you're with your friends. Like, is this something you think that I'm going to get mad at? Like, if I find out, like, just trying to figure out what's the reason why you wouldn't tell me like you're out with your friends. Like, is it something you feel like you don't have to tell me or you shouldn't tell me? Like, start with sort of like a curious questioning of just asking like, why do you think you don't? And then let them know, because having friends and hanging out with your friends is like, it's important. Like, let them know like you have friends as well, and understand the need and necessity to spend time outside of the relationship. Like, it's healthy. So let them know that it's healthy. It's something that you want to do and that you encourage it. You think it's great that they hang out with your friends. But let them know that if you find out that they're doing something that they said that they weren't doing, then it just creates, it creates me to think that you're doing something really shady, or like, maybe out with someone who you shouldn't be out with. So yeah, just kind of I'd start with questioning, just asking like, hey, is there a reason why you wouldn't tell me? Like, do you feel like I'd get mad, or do you feel like it's something that I wouldn't approve of? And then, try to get to the bottom of that and let them know that it's not shameful or it's not bad to want to spend time with your friends. But just please let me know so I'm not worried about like where you are. Yeah. So that's kind of what I'd say.
Absolutely. And I think like to your point, it has to be addressed. I would absolutely bring it up, and I would bring it up exactly like Mike said. Like, I would bring it up by saying, hey, I value friendship. I care about friendships too. I have no desire. Like, exactly what you put in the question to our dear Reddit user is largely what you can say. Like, hey, I think friendships are important. I would never want to control your time with your friends. I actually honor that you have the need to spend that time. But the last thing I would add in there is I would also tell him at the end, I would say. But I also just need you to know that transparency and honesty are really important things for me. So I'd always rather you come to me, even if you're not sure and you think that there could be some sort of challenge. I'd always rather you come to me directly and tell me what the potential issue is so we can solve it together or work through it together, rather than it coming out in this kind of way, because that can actually do a little bit more damage to the connection. And I think by validating his need for friend time, by honoring yourself and your needs and talking about that too, and just bringing it up in like an inquisitive manner without it being too confrontational, just being really regulated when you go in. I actually think this is an opportunity to grow the relationship closer, because you're getting something out of the way that it could be a challenge. And in fact, you're turning it into something positive by being able to hash out this discussion. So that is it for today on another episode of Can This Be Fixed? If you want to post your Reddit questions and get them answered, or even post them in the YouTube description down below, you are welcome to. We check out both places and try to gather the best questions with our team that are the most burning questions that people are asking about frequently. And if you're listening to this online, check us out on YouTube at Personal Development School-Thais Gibson. Or if you are watching on YouTube, you can also listen to the audio version of this. We can keep you company on your drive to work or your drive home from work or school. And you will find us on the Thais Gibson podcast on Apple, iTunes, Spotify, anywhere you listen to your podcast. You can also check out our wonderful co-host, Mike DeZio, on Instagram. We'll link his socials down below. And if you want to do a deeper dive into some work at PDS and heal your attachment style to become securely attached, you can go to personaldevelopmentschool.com and check out our 7-day free trial to dive into your personalized attachment healing program. Thank you so much for watching, and please stay tuned and come back for another episode of Can This Be Fixed? If you enjoyed this episode, please take a moment to subscribe, rate, and review us on your favorite podcast platform. Share it with friends and family who are on their journey of personal development and growth, and thank you for listening. Next week, we'll be back with more insights to guide you on your journey. And until then, keep practicing our tools and strategies to change your subconscious mind and apply some of the powerful learnings from this podcast so that you experience real life transformation.